Genevieve Grotjan was already feeling like a failure. Despite her love of math, despite earning a degree in math, she had been unable to land her dream job as a math teacher. It was 1936, the Great Depression, and jobs were hard to come by. She was lucky to land this position crunching numbers for the Railroad Retirement Board. It was a nice, stable government job after all. But a government job meant passing the civil service math test. That shouldn't be a problem. Genevieve was good at math. She completed the exam with ease and handed it in, went back to her desk. Little did Genevieve know at the time, her scores on that exam would catch the attention of William F. Friedman. Friedman didn't work for the Railroad Retirement Board, though. He was a cryptographer for the U.S. Army, tasked with heading the project to break the elusive purple code used by Japan to communicate throughout the axis of evil during World War II. Little did Genevieve know, Friedman was looking for code breakers, and her civil service test screamed code breaker. And so it seemed the aspiring math teacher turned number cruncher was destined for much greater things. Let's fix that. Hello, I'm Shayla Fontaine, and you're listening to History Fix, where I tell lesser-known true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. I am back this week with part 2 of my two-parter on women in STEM. As promised, I have 6 more incredible stories to share with you about women you've probably never heard of. Now, this first one may sound familiar if you listen to Minifix number 25 over on Patreon called Backdoor to War. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you should know that I have lots of exclusive mini episodes and other bonus content that you can tap into at patreon.com/historyfixpodcasts for just $5 a month. Patreon subscribers are literally what keep this show going. So huge thank you to those who are subscribed. And if you're not, and you're a regular listener of the show, you really should consider it. Always linked in the description. But anyway, in Minifix number 25 about the Pearl Harbor backdoor to war theory, this theory that FDR let Pearl Harbor happen as a way to get the U.S. involved in World War II. In that Minifix episode, I mentioned a woman by the name of Genevieve Grotjan Feinstein. Genevieve was an American mathematician and crypto analyst during World War II. She was born in Buffalo, New York in 1913. And pretty much from the start, she was in love with math. From a very young age, she aspired to be a math teacher, which is pretty much the only thing a girl who liked math could be in those days. Not that there's anything wrong with being a math teacher, says the math teacher. But anyway, Genevieve graduated from the University of Buffalo in 1936 with a math degree. And then she tried to find a position teaching math. However, probably due to the Great Depression, she was unable to find a teaching job. I 100% understand this predicament. I graduated college in 2010 with straight A's from a prestigious university and could not find a teaching job for 3 years, thanks to the recession. So I deeply understand Genevieve's struggles here. She instead took a job as a statistical clerk at the Railroad Retirement Board. This is a government organization that provides retirement benefits to past railroad workers. And because it's a government position, Genevieve was required to take a civil service math test to prove that she could do the math needed for the job. Now, not only could Genevieve do the math needed for the railroad retirement job, she scored so high on the test that she caught the attention of U.S. Army cryptographer William F. Friedman. Friedman was scouring the results of this civil service math test coming from all sorts of government employees. He was looking for people who stood out as exceptionally talented mathematicians in order to recruit them to his cryptanalysis team. Genevieve's scores stood out, especially because of her obvious skills in the areas of pattern recognition and logic. This is exactly what Friedman was looking for in a code breaker. Because 1939, the cusp of World War II, there are some pretty important codes waiting to be broken. Friedman hired Genevieve to work as a junior cryptanalyst for the Army's Signals Intelligence Service, or SIS. And the main objective of the SIS in 1939 and 1940 was breaking the encryption used in Japan's Type B cipher machine, which was codenamed Purple. They needed to break this purple code because they needed to know what the messages Japan was sending out said. Why? Because Japan was part of the axis of evil or whatever during World War II. So to be clear, World War II had already begun as of September of 1939. The U.S. did not enter the war until December of 1941, but they were still working to crack this code in order to sort of stay on top of things and prepare for the possible inevitability of entering the war. They needed to know what these top secret Japanese messages said. In the end, it was Genevieve in September of 1940 who eventually cracked the purple code by picking up on patterns, discovering the cyclical nature of the code. I could go into detail here, but it would be really boring. What you really need to know is that Genevieve figured out how the Japanese purple code worked, which allowed the SIS to build an equivalent Type B code machine, just like the one the Japanese were using, which allowed them to intercept almost all of the messages sent between Japan and its embassies in foreign countries. These intercepted messages served throughout World War II as the main source of information about Axis plans and movements. No big deal or anything. After that, Genevieve was assigned to another project, the Venona Project. Okay, so World War II is over. The Cold War has begun. So now, as a part of the Venona Project, Genevieve works to decode encrypted messages sent by the Soviet Union's KGB. And she, just like before, she made a significant breakthrough, which allowed the SIS once again to decode KGB messages. This was called, quote, the most important single cryptanalytic break in the whole history of Venona, end quote. Later, the Encyclopedia of American Women at War would call her cracking of the Japanese purple code, quote, one of the greatest achievements in the history of U.S. code breaking, end quote. In 1947, Genevieve resigned from her government job and started teaching math at George Mason University, which is really all she ever wanted to do anyway. She married a guy named Chien-Shiung Feinstein, who worked as a chemist actually on the Manhattan Project, which we'll talk about more soon. Genevieve lived to be 93 years old, dying in 2006. And it wasn't until 4 years after her death in 2010 that the National Security Agency inducted her posthumously into their Hall of Fame. So, have you heard of Genevieve Grotjan Feinstein, and why does it matter? Well, do you enjoy freedom from fascist dictators? A fascist dictator from Germany who killed as many as 20 million people in the years leading up to and during World War II? A nationalistic dictator from Japan who killed as many as 30 million people during that same time period? If so, if you do appreciate freedom from that sort of a thing, then Genevieve Grotjan Feinstein matters a whole lot. It was her work in breaking the Japanese purple code that led to the Allied powers intercepting Axis communications during the war, which aided immeasurably in an Allied victory. I mean, that's a mic drop by Genevieve. Our next woman in STEM hails from the exact same time period as Genevieve. In fact, she was born just 1 year earlier in 1912, except in China. Chien-Shiung Wu is known to this day in China as the greatest female Chinese scientist of the 20th century. Other nicknames include the First Lady of Physics and the Chinese Marie Curie. So, what earned her these titles. Chien-Shiung was born in a small town in China in 1912, the same year that China transitioned from an empire to a republic. And this would cause all sorts of problems with Japan over the next few decades, which I really dig into in episode 142 about Pearl Harbor with my expert guest, Quinn Cho. And actually, we're going to come back to this conflict next week, too. But right now, Chien-Shiung is just a small girl. She doesn't know about all that's to come yet. She was a middle child with two brothers, and her father did something rather unusual in China at the time, in that he encouraged her to pursue her education as far as she possibly could. Her father even opened his own school that she attended when she was young. She later graduated from the University of Nanking, China, graduating in 1934 with a degree in physics. In 1936, she decided to move to the United States where she could earn an advanced degree in physics. So let me just put that timing into perspective for you real quick. Chien-Shiung leaves Nanking, China in 1936. The very next year, in 1937, we have the Nanking Massacre, or the Rape of Nanking. I've talked about this before. I will talk about it again. This is one of the most horrific historical events I never knew about. I don't think many people in the Western world do know about it. The Nanking or Nanjing Massacre was a 6-week period of mass murder and rape in this Chinese city by the Imperial Japanese Army. The Chinese government maintains that as many as 300,000 people were killed in this 6-week period. So Chien-Shiung left Nanking the year before this happened. She went to the United States, where she studied nuclear physics at the University of California, Berkeley. This also happened to be where J. Robert Oppenheimer taught. You know that name if you listen to episode 144 about the Manhattan Project. He was the leader, like the scientific leader of that project, which developed the first atomic bomb. So Chien-Shiung studied under Oppenheimer. She graduated from Berkeley in 1940. Got married, and moved to the East Coast, where she became the first female physics professor at Princeton. Okay, so 1940, she leaves California and heads east. Once again, Chien-Shiung has managed to escape tragedy just before it could befall her. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, anti-Asian sentiment was strong on the West Coast. People of Japanese ancestry were rounded up and forced into internment camps. Now, Chien-Shiung was not Japanese, but if she had remained in California, she would have been heavily discriminated against and targeted racially anyway because of her Asian features. Now, luckily, she did not stay on the West Coast. Once again, she left just in time. In 1944, she took a job at Columbia University and got involved in the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bomb. She didn't just get involved, though. She made the whole thing possible. It was Chien-Shiung who figured out how to separate uranium into U-235 and U-238 isotopes using a process she developed called gaseous diffusion. Okay, so I don't really know what that means, but I do know that this was critical. It was the only way to produce enough uranium to create an atomic bomb. After the war, Chien-Shiung continued her work at Columbia University studying beta decay. So during this time, when she was studying beta decay and sort of becoming this expert on beta decay, she was approached by two other scientists, Tsung-Dao Lee and Chen-Nin Yang, who asked her to conduct a very difficult experiment, this very tricky experiment, to prove a theory that they had about beta decay. I'm not sure why they didn't just do it themselves, this experiment. Maybe they couldn't for whatever reason, but they asked Chien-Shiung to do it. She did the experiment successfully. It proved this beta decay theory that they had, and these two male scientists, Lee and Yang, both received Nobel Prizes for it in 1957. Did Chien-Shiung get one of those Nobel Prizes for her part? For doing the dang thing? Nope. Did you really expect her to? Despite getting no credit, this experiment that she conducted is referred to in textbooks to this day as the Wu experiment. Not the Li experiment, not the Yang experiment, the Wu experiment. Make that make sense. Throughout her time at Columbia, Chien-Shiung also made breakthroughs while studying sickle cell disease, and she did receive many awards and honors: the Comstock Prize in Physics, the National Medal of Science, the Wolf Prize in Physics, and she was the first woman to serve as president of the American Physical Society. After retiring from Columbia in 1981, she focused on encouraging young girls to pursue careers in science through public speaking about her own experiences and through support of educational programs for girls. She died in 1997 at the age of 84, and this is the best part. I fully teared up when I read this part. Her ashes were buried in the courtyard of the school in China that her father had started, the place where it all began. Once again, like with Lisa Meitner, Chien-Shiung's contributions, they might be viewed as controversial because of her involvement in the invention of the atomic bomb, but you also have to consider her contributions to physics in general, her work with sickle cell, and her commitment to inspiring other young girls to pursue careers in science. I just can't get over how Chien-Shiung always managed to be in the right place at the right time, or rather how she always avoided being in the wrong place at the wrong time, really. Up next is someone you have probably heard of thanks to the 2016 movie Hidden Figures. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen that movie. Katherine Johnson. Katherine Johnson is our first Black woman in STEM so far in this two-parter. And you have to consider, if white women faced so many roadblocks like this, pursuing their math and science passions, think for a minute how much more difficult it was for Black women. Borderline impossible. Katherine Johnson was born in West Virginia in 1918. Okay, pause. Would you want to be a Black female in West Virginia in 1918? No. Why? Because literally all of the odds are against you. You have no privilege, you have no opportunity, you have no power. That is the world in which Katherine Johnson was born. Now, let me tell you what she made of it. Katherine was brilliant as a young girl in school, and she loved numbers. She was so good at math that she actually skipped several grades. By the age of 13, she was attending high school classes on the campus of the historically Black West Virginia State College. At 18, she moved on to actually attending that college itself, earning a math degree. She graduated in 1937 and began teaching at a Black public school in Virginia. How many of these women were teachers at some point? I've lost count now. In 1939, something rather remarkable happened quite a bit ahead of its time in West Virginia. They decided to integrate their graduate schools. West Virginia State University's president hand-selected Katherine, as well as two Black men, to be the first Black students in the graduate math program at the school. And Katherine accepted the invitation, but she actually decided to leave the program soon after to start a family. It was kind of one or the other at the time. Women couldn't really have both like men could. She returned to teaching years later when her 3 daughters were older, but it wasn't until 1952 that Katherine found out about an open position at the all-Black West Area computing section of what at the time was called NACA, N-A-C-A, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. Today, it's called NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So Katherine goes to work for this precursor to NASA at the Langley Research Center in Hampton Roads, Virginia. She ended up working there for 33 years, calculating trajectories, launch windows, and emergency return paths for the first ever U.S. manned space flights. Most notably, the successful mission of astronaut John Glenn, the first American in orbit. According to a biography by Margot Lee Shetterly on NASA's website, quote, in 1962, as NASA prepared for the orbital mission of John Glenn, Johnson was called upon to do the work that she would become most known for. The complexity of the orbital flight had required the construction of a worldwide communications network, linking tracking stations around the world to IBM computers in Washington, Cape Canaveral in Florida, and Bermuda. The computers had been programmed with the orbital equations that would control the trajectory of the capsule in Glenn's Friendship 7 mission from liftoff to splashdown. But the astronauts were wary of putting their lives in the care of the electronic calculating machines, which were prone to hiccups and blackouts. As a part of the pre-flight checklist, Glenn asked engineers to, quote within a quote, get the girl, Johnson, to run the same numbers through the same equations that had been programmed into the computer, but by hand on her desktop mechanical calculating machine. If she says they're good, Katherine Johnson remembers the astronaut saying, then I'm ready to go. Glenn's flight was a success and marked a turning point in the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union in space. End quote. But if you were to ask Katherine Johnson what her greatest accomplishment was, she would say her contributions to the Apollo moon landing. It was Katherine who crunched the numbers that synced Apollo's lunar module to the command module that orbited the moon, after all. She retired in 1986, saying of her time at Langley, quote, I loved going to work every single day, end quote. Katherine received the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2015 and died in 2020 at the age of 101. Let's hang out in space for a little while longer with the rest of these ladies. Actually, it is the space age after all. Next is Sally Ride. You may know Sally as the first American woman to travel into space. That's sort of her claim to fame. But let's back it up to see how she got to that point. Sally was born in Encino, California in 1951. She was very into tennis when she was young. In fact, as a teenager, she was ranked in the top 20 nationally in the junior tennis circuit. Sally actually dropped out of college her sophomore year to pursue a professional tennis career. But after 3 months, she had a change of heart and she decided that getting a college education was more important. And so she went to Stanford. I'm not sure how that works, really. You drop out your sophomore year of college and then 3 months later, you're like, actually, never mind. How about Stanford? And they're like, sure, come on. I don't know. She must have really impressed them. Sally eventually earned bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in physics from Stanford. So yeah, she really impressed them. So much for tennis. After graduating, Sally saw an ad in the newspaper, a NASA ad. They were looking for people to join their astronaut program. I had no idea NASA looked for astronauts by putting ads in newspapers, but this was 1977, so I don't know. I guess things were different back then. So Sally applied to be in this astronaut program along with 8,000 other people. Of those 8,000, only 35 people were accepted, and only 6 of them were women. So Sally entered the astronaut program where she completed a bunch of training. And then in 1983, Sally was chosen as one of 5 crew members to go into space aboard the space shuttle Challenger STS-7, working as the flight engineer. No, this was not the one that blew up, not that Challenger. That happened a few years later. As the launch date approached, Sally was interviewed several times about preparations to go into space, and she was repeatedly asked questions such as how space was going to affect her ability to reproduce and what kind of makeup she was going to take on the mission. Yes, y'all, these are the types of questions that she was asked. On June 18, 1983, Sally became the first American woman in space and also the youngest American in space at the time. She went on another shuttle mission in 1984, and then later she worked on investigating the Challenger explosion, which happened in 1986. After that, she worked as a physicist and physics professor at the University of California, San Diego. But her real passion was inspiring other girls to pursue pursue careers in math, science, and technology with Sally Ride Science, which was a company that she started in 2001. Sally Ride died in 2012 of pancreatic cancer at just 61 years old. She received a Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously in 2013, 1 year after her death. We can't leave space without talking about Mae Jemison. Mae Jemison was born in 1956 in Decatur, Alabama. Once again, not an ideal time or place to be a Black girl, right? Mae's parents recognized this as well, and they moved the family to Chicago when Mae was around 3 years old. Mae graduated from Stanford as well in 1977 with degrees in chemical engineering and African American studies. And then she got her doctorate in medicine from Cornell University. After that, she worked actually as a medical doctor, this job took her to Kenya in Africa. And while she was there, while she was stationed as a doctor in Kenya, she traveled to Egypt, Greece, and Israel. And she said after these travels, quote, "From all these places in Egypt and Israel, all the people, the ideas, one on top of the other, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Palestine, Israel, Romans, Nubians, and pharaohs, I began to understand the complexity of politics, and I also saw faith. I felt the wind gathering energy, and I understood that until we humans fully acknowledge how intertwined we are with one another, there will be endless suffering. Until people are willing to recognize and honestly, openly, and transparently discuss inequities, wrongs, aggressions, violence, peace offerings, and history, not only will individuals suffer, but so will the planet." End quote. Amen to that. This time abroad inspired her to join the Peace Corps in 1983 as a medical officer. So 1983 was the same year that Sally Ride became the first American woman in space. And so inspired by this, Mae applied for the astronaut program, NASA's astronaut program, in 1985. Who knows if she would have been accepted or not, because due to the Challenger explosion in 1986, the program was sort of put on pause, right? They're not in a hurry to send more people into space at this point. She applied again in 1987 and was one of 15 people chosen out of 2,000 applicants. In 1992, Mae went to space on the Space Shuttle Endeavour, becoming the first African-American woman in space. Mae worked for NASA for 6 years before leaving to sort of combine her passions together. So she had gained this valuable perspective while visiting Africa, and especially while visiting Israel, really, that everyone is intertwined and that we have to overcome injustice and violence or everyone and the earth will suffer, right? That quote that I read of hers. And so after she leaves NASA, she sort of combines this mission, trying to help achieve this with her space experience by starting an international space camp called The Earth We Share. She also taught at Dartmouth College and founded a consulting company called the Jemison Group that focused on combining space and technology to improve everyday life on Earth. So, she's really trying to pay it forward here. Mae is really trying hard to make the world a better place and to incorporate her experiences and her perspective into achieving that goal. Mae is the first and actually the only of our women in STEM who is still alive as of the time of this recording. The National Women's History Museum says, quote, "Mae Jemison currently lives in Houston, Texas, and she stands by her principles," quote within a quote. "Everyone should benefit from the bounty of this planet and its resources, not just those already well-positioned. Solutions, technologies, and systems are more sustainable and beneficial when they are built drawing upon the full range of human perspective, skills, experiences, and talents." End quote within a quote. Continuation of the regular quote. She continues to inspire learners of all ages to reach for the stars. End quote. Our final woman in STEM, which I got a little bit out of chronological order here for some reason, I don't know what happened, but our final woman in STEM, although there are so many others that I could talk about, the final one for now is Judith Love Cohen. I've been wanting to talk about Judith Love Cohen for so very long because her story just absolutely fascinates me. Even if you have never heard of Judith, I think it's very likely that you have heard of her son, comedic actor and musician Jack Black. Judith was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1933. According to her Wikipedia page, by the 5th grade, her classmates were paying her to do their homework for them. Despite being the only girl in her math classes, she decided she wanted to be a math teacher. And so she went to college to study math, but ended up switching to engineering. After getting married, she moved to California, where she worked as a junior engineer for North American Aviation during the day and attended the University of Southern California at night. According to Judith, she went through both her bachelor's and master's degrees at USC without ever meeting another female engineering student. After graduating with her master's degree in engineering in 1957, she went to work at Space Technology Laboratories, where she would work until her retirement in 1990. And during her time there, she worked on the guidance computer for the Minuteman missile. Okay, so if you're wondering what the Minuteman missile is, so was I. It is an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads over 6,000 miles away at speeds of over 15,000 miles per hour. And it is still active, this missile. In the U.S. today, it is poised and ready for action. Why? Well, it's supposed to be a nuclear deterrent. So that other countries won't drop atomic bombs on us, because if they do, we send out this thing. So Judith worked on that. She also, and this is really considered to be the highlight of her career, she also worked on the abort guidance system that got the failed Apollo 13 astronauts back home safely. I have a whole episode about this, episode 25. Definitely go back and listen to that one if you missed it. It is a crazy story. Basically, an oxygen tank exploded, which forced the astronauts to pile into the lunar module to use as a sort of lifeboat to get back home before they even got to the moon. They are piecing together, literally, you guys, they are piecing together duct tape and plastic bags, a sock. They use somebody's sock to pull this off. And it's ultimately unbelievably successful. And this is where the famous audio, you've probably heard, Houston, we've had a problem. This is where that audio comes from the Apollo 13 very near disaster. Well, this abort guidance system that Judith worked on is what got the guys home safely in the lunar module. Judith retired from aerospace engineering in 1990 and started a publishing company for children's books. She published a series of books called You Can Be a Woman, Fill in the Blank, to encourage young girls to pursue careers in science and engineering. And then there was another series that she published called Green that taught young children about protecting the environment. My favorite story about Judith was told by her son Neil in a memorial tribute after her death from cancer in 2016. Neil says that on the day Judith went into labor with his younger half-brother, Jack Black, in 1969, she was troubleshooting problems with schematics, right? So she's fully working the day that she goes into labor. And she manages to call her boss to tell him that she's fixed the issue. She's figured out the problem. She's fixed it. And then she delivers Jack right after. Just truly illustrates the plight of a working mom. I assure you, none of the all-male engineers that she went to school with ever had to worry about workplace obstacles like that, right? Once again, we have to step back to consider the contributions of these women to our world today. Sure, they accomplished things, they cracked codes, they made scientific and mathematical breakthroughs, they went to outer space, but I'd argue that their most important contributions were as trailblazers. They opened the door for other women to follow in their footsteps, to follow them into careers in STEM. And for many, that was very intentional. We see them starting programs, publishing books, public speaking to inspire young girls, to say, I did this and you can too. Or, in the words of Katherine Johnson, quote, Girls are capable of doing everything men are capable of doing. Sometimes they have more imagination than men, end quote. Imagination, sure. A few other words come to mind too, though. Courage, determination, resilience. Because it's one thing to get a doctorate in physics or math or whatever and make some amazing discovery or crack a code or go to space as a man in the early to mid-1900s. It's another thing altogether to do that as a woman. The obstacles were nearly insurmountable. These women, Genevieve, Chien-Shiung, Katherine, Sally, Mae, and Judith, plus 6 more last week, plus tons of others that I didn't talk about, stand as testaments to what women are capable of. After all, anything men can do, women can do bleeding. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I hope you found this story interesting, and maybe you even learned something new. As always, source material for this episode can be found in the show notes. Be sure to follow my Instagram @HistoryFixPodcast to see some images that go along with this episode and to stay on top of new episodes as they drop. I'd also really appreciate it if you would rate and follow History Fix on whatever app you're using to listen, and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about it. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix.